They thought I'd cry. That's the part that still makes me laugh a little, even now. My sister Rima said it like she was announcing dinner plans. Starting tomorrow, Danish and his parents are moving in here. If you have a problem with that, you can move out. For adults at the table went quiet. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My father stared at his plate like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the house. And me. I smiled. Not the fake, polite smile you give when you're trying to keep the peace. A real one. The kind that comes from knowing something the other person doesn't. Because 3 weeks earlier, a letter had arrived at that house with my name on it. Not Rima's. Not my parents'. Mine. And after I read it, alone in my room, with the door locked, I understood something none of them had bothered to check. That house wasn't just the family house anymore. Not the way they all assumed. Rima kept talking, laying out her plan like she was the one who got to decide who stayed and who left. My mother nodded along, the way she always did when it came to her younger daughter. My father said nothing, which by then I'd learned was its own kind of answer. I just kept smiling and reached for my water glass. Because tomorrow, when Danish and his parents showed up with their suitcases, they were going to find out something my family had conveniently forgotten to mention to anyone. I hadn't just read that letter. I'd already made a call. My father built that house in 1994. I was 6. I remember the smell of fresh paint and my mother arguing with him about the color of the kitchen tiles, a fight she eventually won, like she won most quiet fights in our house. Rima came 4 years after me, and from the day she was born, something in our parents shifted. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, just fact. She was the surprise baby, the one who arrived after 2 miscarriages my mother never talked about. She was fussed over, forgiven faster, held longer. I grew up understanding without anyone saying it out loud, that my job was to be fine. To not need anything. To be the daughter who didn't cause problems. So when my father's health started failing 3 years ago, I was the one who moved back in. Not Rima, who had her own life in the city with Danish. I was the one who sat with him at hospital appointments, who learned the names of his medications, who filled out the forms nobody else wanted to touch. I didn't do it for a reward. I want to be clear about that. I did it because he was my father and he was scared and somebody needed to show up. But 6 months ago, he started talking differently. Quiet comments about making sure things were settled properly. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had no idea he'd already been to see a lawyer. Rima didn't know about the lawyer visits. Neither did my mother, as far as I could tell. My father had always been a private man about money, the kind who paid cash for the car so no one could ask questions about installments. The letter came on a Tuesday. Official envelope, law firm letterhead, my name typed neatly on the front. My hands actually shook opening it, because in our house, official mail addressed only to me was not a normal occurrence. Inside was a copy of an updated deed and a short letter from the lawyer confirming that my father had transferred primary ownership of the house into my name, with a clause that guaranteed my parents' lifetime residency. He'd done it quietly months earlier, and asked the lawyer to notify me directly once it was finalized, rather than announcing it himself. There was a note in his handwriting clipped to the back. Just one line, "You stayed when it mattered. This is mine to give, and I'm giving it to you. Don't tell your sister until I'm ready." I sat on my bed for a long time after reading that. Not celebrating. Just absorbing it. Because I knew my father, and I knew what this meant for how he saw the last 3 years. And I knew, eventually, this was going to blow up in a room with all of us in it. I just didn't think it would happen this fast, or that Rima would light the fuse herself, at a dinner table, without even knowing what she was standing on. I didn't say anything that night. I let Rima finish her announcement, let her enjoy the moment of thinking she'd just rearranged the entire household with one sentence. Danish's parents, she explained, were between houses after selling their place, and it made sense for everyone to just move in together. Temporary, she called it. I'd heard that word before from other people, about other situations that never actually ended. My mother tried to smooth it over. It'll be nice, having more people around, she said, in the voice she used when she wanted a decision to feel like it had already been made by consensus. My father just kept eating. After dinner, I found him alone on the back porch, the way he liked to sit after a meal, listening to nothing in particular. You knew she was going to say that tonight? I asked. I knew she wanted to, he said. I didn't know she'd do it like that. You're going to let 4 more people move into a house that isn't even hers to offer? He looked at me for a long moment. It's not my house to offer either, not anymore. That was the point, remember? I did remember. I just hadn't expected to need the reminder so soon. Are you going to tell her? I asked. That's not mine to do, he said quietly. You've been carrying this house for 3 years. You get to decide how she finds out. I went to bed that night with a decision already forming. Tomorrow, when the suitcases showed up, I wasn't going to stop them at the door. I was going to let them all the way in first. By 9 the next morning, there were 2 cars in the driveway that didn't belong to us. Danish's father was directing traffic like he already owned the place, waving his son toward the good parking spot near the gate, the one my father always used. I stood in the doorway and watched them unload. Suitcases, a rolled-up rug, a box labeled kitchen in Danish's mother's handwriting, like she was planning to take over the kitchen specifically. Rima breezed past me with a duffel bag over her shoulder, practically glowing. Isn't this exciting? She said. It's going to be so much easier with everyone here. Easier for who? I asked, but I said it lightly, almost playfully, and she didn't catch the edge in it. I helped carry in a box. I even made tea for everyone that afternoon, the good tea, the kind we saved for guests. Danish's mother commented on how spacious the house was, how they'd need to think about reorganizing the storage room for their things. She said it like a woman already measuring curtains. I smiled and nodded and said, "We'll figure it out." What I didn't say was that I'd already called the lawyer that morning, before anyone else was even awake, just to confirm one detail I needed to be completely sure about before I did anything else. I wanted to know exactly what my rights were as the legal owner of a house 4 extra people had just moved their entire lives into, without asking the one person who actually could have said no. The lawyer's answer was simple, and it changed the entire shape of what I was about to do next. You have every right most homeowners have, the lawyer told me. Since there's no lease, no formal agreement, and they're not on the deed, legally they're occupants at your discretion. You can ask them to leave. If they don't, there's a process, but it's straightforward because there's no tenancy established. I thanked him and hung up, and for a moment I just sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly. More like relief, the kind that comes from finally having solid ground under something that had felt unstable for years. I didn't act on it immediately though. I wanted to see how far Rima would take this before I said anything. I didn't have to wait long. By the second week, Danish's mother had rearranged the kitchen cabinets for better flow. My mother's spice jars, organized the same way for 20 years, were suddenly in a box on the counter. Danish's father had started referring to the garage as my workshop. And Rima, when I gently mentioned that maybe we should talk about how long this arrangement was going to last, looked at me like I'd said something absurd. "It's not really your call to make, is it?" she said. "It's Dad's house. He's not complaining." I didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, I asked her to sit down with me that weekend, told her there was something about the house she needed to know, something Dad and I had been meaning to explain properly. She rolled her eyes, but she agreed. She thought it was going to be some boring conversation about bills or maintenance schedules. She had no idea what was actually about to be laid out in front of her. Saturday afternoon, I asked everyone to sit in the living room. Rima, my parents, Danish, and yes, his parents too, since by then they'd made themselves comfortable enough to consider themselves part of every family conversation. I brought out a folder. Just a plain manila folder, nothing dramatic. Inside was a copy of the deed, the lawyer's letter, and my father's handwritten note, which I'd kept. 3 months ago, I started, Dad transferred ownership of this house into my name. It's legally mine now. He and Mom have a guaranteed right to live here for as long as they want. That part doesn't change. Silence. Real silence. The kind where you can hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. Rima's face went through about 4 different expressions before landing on disbelief. That's not possible. This is Dad's house. It was, my father said quietly from the armchair. I gave it to her. She's the one who stayed. Danish's mother's smile had completely disappeared. Well, this is family business. I think we should. You're welcome to stay while we sort this out, I said, keeping my voice even. But I want to be clear about something. Nobody discussed 4 additional people moving into my home. Nobody asked me. Rima announced it at dinner like the decision had already been made. It's still a family house, Rima said, her voice rising. You can't just. I can, I said. Legally, I can. I checked. The room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see who would break first. Rima stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You did this on purpose. You've been sitting on this for weeks, letting us move everyone in, just so you could humiliate me in front of Danish's parents. I didn't ask you to move anyone in, I said. You did that on your own, the same way you've always assumed things would just work out because you wanted them to. That's not fair. What's not fair, I said, and my voice finally cracked a little, not from weakness but from 3 years of things I'd never said out loud, is that I moved back into this house when Dad got sick. I learned his medication schedule. I sat in waiting rooms while you were building your life in the city. And when he decided to recognize that, your first reaction wasn't happiness for me. It was to announce at dinner that you and 4 other people were entitled to live here without even asking. Danish's father cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the practical arrangements, rather than the emotional ones. The practical arrangement, I said, turning to him, is that you and your wife have 2 weeks to find another place. I'm not putting anyone on the street today. But this was never supposed to be permanent, and it isn't going to become permanent by accident. My mother, who'd been silent the whole time, finally spoke. Rima, sit down. Let's talk about this properly, as a family. Rima didn't sit. She looked at me like she was seeing someone unfamiliar. You've changed, she said. No, I said. I just finally have something to protect. The 2 weeks that followed were quiet in a way the house hadn't been in years. Danish's parents packed slowly, with the kind of wounded dignity people use when they want you to feel guilty for enforcing a boundary they overstepped in the first place. Danish barely spoke to me. Rima spoke to me even less. My mother tried, in her own way, to bridge the gap. She'd corner me in the kitchen and say things like, "She's still your sister," as if I'd forgotten, as if this was ever about forgetting that. I know, I told her once, while drying a dish that had somehow ended up in the wrong cabinet during Danish's mother's reorganizing phase. That's exactly why I didn't throw everyone out the same day. I gave them time. I didn't have to. My father didn't say much during those 2 weeks either, but one evening he found me on the porch, in the same spot where we talked the night this all started. I didn't do this to punish her, he said. I want you to know that. I know, I said. And I did. I understood by then that this had never really been about punishing anyone. It was about someone finally seeing 3 years of showing up and deciding it deserved to mean something. She'll come around, he added. Might take a while. Maybe, I said. Or maybe she needs to understand that things aren't just hers because she wants them. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the letter arrived, I felt like the weight of the whole situation had finally settled into something manageable. But I didn't know yet that Rima had one more move left to make. The night before Danish's parents were supposed to leave, Rima knocked on my bedroom door. Not the confident knock she'd used my whole life, the one that assumed the answer was always yes. This one was hesitant. Can we talk? She asked. I let her in. She sat on the edge of my bed, the way she used to when we were kids, and she'd done something she knew Mom would be upset about. I went to see a lawyer too, she said. This week. I wanted to know if there was any way to contest what Dad did. Some kind of unfairness claim, favoritism, something. I waited. There isn't, she said. He told me it was Dad's to give, and Dad gave it fairly, to the person who earned it. His words. Not mine. I didn't say anything. I'd already known that, but hearing her admit it out loud was different. I was angry, she continued, because it made me look at the last 3 years honestly, and I didn't like what I saw. You were here. I wasn't. And instead of dealing with that, I tried to just take up space like I always have, and assume it would work out. Why didn't you just say that at dinner, I asked, instead of giving me an ultimatum? Because admitting I needed something is harder than demanding it, she said quietly. I'm working on that. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years, and for now, that felt like enough to build on. Danish's parents are leaving tomorrow, I said. That part isn't changing. I know, she said. That part was never really about them anyway, was it? A month later, the house had settled back into something that felt, if not exactly like before, at least like something honest. Danish's parents found a small apartment across town. Danish still came around for dinner sometimes, quieter than before, more careful about which rooms he treated as his own. Rima didn't move back into the house full-time, but she started coming by more, actually helping instead of assuming help would appear. She sat with our father during one of his appointments, the first one she'd ever attended, and afterward she called me, not to report on it like a task completed, but just to talk about how scared she'd been seeing him that fragile up close. I get it now, she said. A little. Not all of it. But a little. I didn't need her to understand all of it. I'd stopped needing that kind of recognition somewhere in those 2 weeks when I'd had to lay a folder on a coffee table just to be taken seriously in my own home. My father's health has stabilized since then, more good days than bad. My mother still occasionally sighs about how she wishes we could all just get along without lawyers and deeds being part of the conversation. I understand what she means. I also understand that sometimes the paperwork is the only thing that finally makes people see what's been true all along. I didn't do any of this to win. I did it because I was done being the daughter who stayed quiet so everyone else could feel comfortable. So I'll ask you what I've asked myself since that dinner. If you'd spent 3 years showing up for someone, and it finally got recognized, would you have smiled the way I did? Or would you have said something at the table?